1. e4 immediately claims central space, opens diagonals for the queen and bishop, and prepares for rapid development, establishing a principled opening stance. This move immediately challenges white's central pawn and leads into the highly complex and strategically rich Sicilian defense, a popular choice for players seeking dynamic imbalances from the outset. This move immediately prepares to control the center and develop a piece, initiating one of the most popular and theoretically rich branches of the Sicilian defense. This move transitions into the French defense, a solid structure aimed at challenging white's central pawn presence and preparing to attack on the queenside. This move initiates the main lines of the Taimanov Sicilian, aiming to seize central space and create imbalances. This move initiates the classical Tarrasch variation of the French defense, leading to a dynamic pawn structure where black challenges white's central pawn majority directly. This move initiates the main lines of the classical Sicilian, where white establishes a strong central pawn presence and develops a knight to its natural square, aiming for rapid development and attacking opportunities. This move, 4, nf6, continues the development of black's pieces and directly challenges white's central knight, aiming to disrupt white's pawn center and prepare for kingside castling. This move develops a piece actively, controls central squares, and prepares for kingside castling, aligning with common strategic goals in the open Sicilian. This move transitions into a Caro-Kann-like pawn structure, solidifying black's central control and preparing to develop the kingside pieces while potentially challenging white's central pawn. This move, developing the bishop to an active square and preparing for kingside castling, is a key idea in the classical variation of the Sicilian defense, aiming for rapid development and a solid pawn structure. This move develops the bishop to its natural square, preparing to castle and connecting the rooks, a standard defensive maneuver in the classical variation of the Sicilian defense. Castling kingside secures the king and prepares to connect the rooks, a crucial step in developing pieces and consolidating the position. Castling on both sides signifies the end of the initial opening phase and prepares for a strategic battle of central control and kingside initiative. This aggressive pawn push solidifies white's center and prepares to attack on the kingside, aiming to create a pawn storm while black will likely focus on queenside expansion or central counterplay. This move initiates a plan to control the b5 square, preventing white's nc3-b5 advance and preparing for potential pawn advances on the queenside. Developing the bishop to a natural square prepares to castle kingside and supports a potential queenside pawn advance with b4. This move prepares to challenge white's central control and potentially support a b5 pawn advance, typical in these Sicilian structures where black aims to gain queenside space. This move prepares to develop the queen to a more active square, potentially supporting a kingside pawn advance or redeploying to assist in a central or queenside operation. This move prepares to expand on the queenside, challenging white's control of the center and potentially creating weaknesses for white's pawn structure. This move aims to reposition the bishop to a more active diagonal and prepare for potential central pawn breaks like e5, while also potentially supporting a knight transfer to d5. This move develops the bishop to a more active diagonal, supporting the central pawn structure and preparing to challenge white's control of the d5 square. This pawn thrust aggressively challenges black's central pawn structure and aims to open lines for white's pieces while potentially restricting black's development. This capture opens the d-file, challenging white's central pawn majority and creating a dynamic tension that will dictate the Middle game strategy. This pawn exchange opens the f-file and creates a central pawn majority for white, aiming to exploit the immediate tactical possibilities and gain space. This move prepares to reroute the knight to a more active central square, likely f5 or d5, to challenge white's aggressive pawn push and support a potential queenside expansion. By exchanging the bishop for the knight, white simplifies the position and opens the d-file for their rook, while black's queenside pawn majority is now less effectively supported. This move recaptures the bishop, opening the queen's diagonal and connecting the rooks while setting up potential pressure on white's queenside pawns. The knight repositions to a more central square, aiming to support the d4 pawn and potentially attack along the kingside or centralize further. This move prepares to reposition the knight to a more active square, likely targeting the f6 or g5 squares, while also defending the d6 pawn. This move activates the rook to contest the central open d-file and prepares to support a potential advance of the central pawns or add pressure along the file. This move aims to challenge white's control of the d-file and prepare for active counterplay on the queenside. The rook is brought to the f-file to prepare for potential future action along that open file, which may become crucial in the middle game. This move activates the knight to a central outpost and prepares to challenge white's control of the d5 square, potentially leading to a pawn break or a tactical skirmish. This move aims to challenge black's queenside initiative by creating tactical threats against the knight on c5 and potentially disrupting black's pawn structure. Exchanging the bishop on g5 simplifies white's position and removes a strong attacking piece, but it also opens the h-file for black's rook and potentially creates a weakness on e6. This exchange of bishops on g5 and g5 opens the h-file for white's rook and disrupts black's pawn structure, aiming to exploit the weakened kingside. This move forces white's knight to retreat, aiming to eliminate the annoying knight on g5 and improve black's queenside control by preparing to challenge the d-file. This move repositions the knight to a more active central square, preparing to contest control of the d6 and f6 squares and potentially support a kingside attack. This move challenges white's central pawn majority by attacking the d4 pawn and preparing to open the b-file, aiming to disrupt white's coordinated pieces and gain queenside activity. This move is a tactical exchange designed to simplify the position and potentially exploit the resulting pawn structure for white. This move recaptures the bishop and repositions the rook onto the crucial semi-open c-file, preparing to contest control and potentially launch an attack on white's queenside. This move aims to exploit the open d-file for white's rook and pressure black's queenside pawns, forcing a decision about their defense. This move unblocks the d-file for black's rook, creating potential pressure against white's queenside and preparing to contest the open file with white's own rook. This trade of rooks on the d-file opens up the position and resolves the tension, allowing white to redeploy their knight to a more active square while simplifying the board. This move recaptures the pawn and consolidates material equality, while also opening lines for potential counterplay against white's central pawn structure. White captures the undefended pawn, aiming to exploit black's slightly loose queenside pawns and centralize the queen. This move recaptures the pawn, aiming to simplify the position and potentially create a passed pawn on the queenside if black can coordinate their pieces effectively. This move aims to centralize the queen and improve its scope while threatening to exploit white's somewhat compromised kingside pawn structure. This move initiates a tactical sequence, forcing white's king into a more exposed position by creating a battery with the queen and bishop on the open diagonal, potentially leading to material gain or checkmate threats. This move prevents the black queen from returning to the central squares and prepares to defend against potential checks. This move by black continues to press for activity with the queen, aiming to exploit white's somewhat compromised king safety after the exchange of pieces. This move aims to expand white's queenside space and potentially create a protected passed pawn by challenging black's pawn majority. This move re-centers the knight, aiming to support the central pawn and potentially eye the c6 square, preparing for further maneuvering in the dynamic central position. This move repositions the knight to a more active square, aiming to contest control of the center and potentially attack the enemy knight on f6. This move black's queen to c2 aims to exploit the open c-file and create pressure on white's queenside, potentially targeting the c3 knight and initiating tactical skirmishes. This move aims to exploit the now exposed d4 square and pressure black's queenside pawn structure, while also potentially setting up tactical ideas against the black king if it remains centralized. This move allows black to centralize the queen and pressure white's d-pawn, aiming to create counterplay and potentially force concessions. With white's queen now attacking the d3 pawn, the tactical exchange on a6 is unavoidable, forcing black to either defend the pawn or continue an exchange of queens, leading to an endgame where white's pawn structure is more robust. This forcing check is a good attempt to disrupt white's queen and potentially win material or create complications after the queens are exchanged. This move is a prudent retreat to safeguard the king after the opponent's forceful checks and to prepare for potential further threats on the h-file. The knight repositions to an active square, eyeing the weak f2 pawn and potentially creating threats along the kingside, disrupting white's coordination. This move finally addresses the immediate threat of the knight on g4 and prevents a potential fork on f2, while also indirectly supporting the defense of the f3 pawn. This move ventures the knight deep into the opponent's territory, aiming to exploit the vulnerable kingside and potentially create tactical threats against white's exposed pieces. This move aims to activate the rook on the b-file, potentially pressuring black's queenside pawn structure and preparing for further central pawn breaks or maneuvering. This move contests the open b-file, aiming to exchange black's rook and reduce white's initiative on the queenside, while also preparing to support a potential pawn push or recapture on the file. This move repositions the queen to a more active square, aiming to exploit the open c-file and put pressure on black's potentially vulnerable queenside pawns while simultaneously preparing for a potential attack on the kingside. This move exploits the undefended pawn on c4, seeking to disrupt white's coordination and potentially create counterplay, though it neglects the pressure building on the queenside. White aims to control the d-file and pressure black's queenside pawns, potentially creating an open avenue for the rooks and supporting a further pawn advance. This move aims to reposition the queen to a more active square, potentially eyeing the g3 pawn or preparing to support a pawn advance on the queenside. This move aims to reinforce the queenside pawn structure and potentially prepare to advance the b-pawn, while also creating a more secure square for the king. This move strategically repositions the knight to a central outpost, directly challenging white's pawn structure and preparing to exploit the open c-file. This move forces the black knight to retreat from its active centralizing square, aiming to simplify the position and exploit the weakened pawn structure that may arise after black's forced response. This move repositions the knight to a more active central square, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure and potentially create attacking chances against the king. This move aims to create a strong attacking threat on the kingside by potentially repositioning the queen to attack the king or create mating nets, while also defending the vulnerable c4 pawn. This move prepares to reinforce the pawn on b4 and potentially create counterplay on the queenside, aiming to disrupt white's queenside pawn structure. This knight maneuver aims to reposition the knight to a more active square, potentially supporting a kingside attack or defending against black's queenside play. The knight on e3 now aggressively attacks the white king on h1, forcing a response and seeking to disrupt white's coordination. The king cautiously retreats to the safety of the corner, preparing to potentially support a central pawn push or retreat further if necessary. This move boldly advances the rook into enemy territory, aiming to disrupt white's coordination and create attacking chances on the kingside, though it could become a target for white's active pieces. This move repositions the queen to a more active square, allowing it to potentially support a kingside attack and defend against black's advancing pawns. This move recenters the queen to a more active square, preparing to support the knight's advance and potentially create counterplay on the kingside. This move repositions the knight to a more active square, eyeing the vulnerable pawn on e6 and potentially supporting a central pawn push. This move aims to disrupt white's coordinated pieces and potentially create tactical threats, though it leaves the knight vulnerable to attack on g3.